The first thing Chica heard was laughter. Not the soft, respectful laughter that usually floated through a grand wedding hall when guests were entertained. This was sharper, crueler. The kind of laughter people let out when they believed they were standing safely on the winning side of someone else's pain. She stood at the back of the glittering event center in Lekki, one hand gripping the strap of her worn brown handbag, the other pressed against her chest as if that could stop her heart from breaking apart. At the front of the hall, under white roses and golden lights, her husband, Colonel Adeyemi, adjusted the sleeve of his expensive cream tuxedo and smiled beside another woman. Not just any woman. Vanessa Cole. The wealthy Nigerian-American businesswoman everyone in Lagos had been talking about for months. She owned luxury properties in Lagos and Houston, drove imported cars, and carried herself like someone who had never once had to beg life for mercy. Her diamond earrings caught the light each time she turned her head, and every flash felt like a slap across Chica's face. Colonel had married her while Chica was still legally his wife. The master of ceremonies had just finished shouting, "Let us celebrate this beautiful union between two powerful souls," when Chica stepped forward through the crowd, her slippers scraping softly against the polished floor. At first, only a few people noticed her. Then whispers spread from row to row like dry grass catching fire. "Who is that? Why is she crying? Wait, isn't that Colonel's first wife?" Colonel turned, and for one suspended moment, the confident smile on his face disappeared. It was small, almost invisible, but Chica saw it. She saw fear. Not guilt, not shame. Fear. Because he knew exactly who she was. He knew the woman standing before him was the same woman who had once sold her mother's wrapper business jewelry to pay his rent. The same woman who stayed awake nights beside him when he had malaria and no money for proper treatment. The same woman who cooked by candlelight in their one-room apartment in Surulere while he swore to her that one day they would rise together. But somewhere along the way, when the money started coming, Colonel began speaking a different language. He no longer talked about we. Everything became me. My future. My image. My circle. My opportunities. And now here he was, standing under luxury lights, pretending the years they had spent building a life together had never happened. Chica stopped halfway down the aisle. The room had gone silent except for the hum of the air conditioners and the pounding of her blood in her ears. Colonel forced a laugh. "Security," he said lightly, like she was some random troublemaker who had wandered in from the street. "Please help this woman outside." This woman. Not Chica. Not my wife. Just this woman. A few guests shifted in discomfort. Others pulled out phones. Vanessa's polished smile faded as her eyes moved from Chica's face to Colonel's. Chica swallowed hard. "Colonel," she said, and even her own voice sounded strange to her, thin and tight with disbelief. "Tell them who I am." He looked away. That hurt more than if he had shouted. Vanessa slowly removed her hand from his arm. "Colonel," she said, her American accent calm but firm, "what is she talking about?" Colonel smiled again, but now it looked shaky around the edges. "Baby, don't let this ruin our day. She's confused." "Confused?" Chica laughed then, but there was no joy in it. "Confused," she repeated. "I am the woman who washed your clothes by hand when you had nothing. I am the woman who signed the loan papers when no bank trusted you. I am the woman you left in that apartment and told to wait while you traveled for business." Her voice rose. "I am your wife." A wave of gasps moved through the hall. Vanessa took one slow step back. Colonel's mother, seated in the front row in a bright blue galley, suddenly looked down at her lap. That was when Chica understood the deepest cut of all. They knew. At least some of them knew. This humiliation had not happened by accident. It had been prepared, dressed in gold, and served to her in public. Colonel clenched his jaw. "Enough," he snapped. "You came here to embarrass yourself." "No," Chica said, her tears finally falling. "I came here because you buried me alive and expected me to stay silent." The hall was dead quiet now. Then, before anyone could move, an elderly man in a dark suit rose from the second row. He had been sitting quietly all along, his face unreadable, his silver walking stick resting against his chair. Nobody had paid him much attention before. But the moment he stood, Vanessa's expression changed. She looked stunned, then worried. The man cleared his throat. "Nobody should touch her," he said. His voice was deep, steady, and carried across the room without effort. Connell frowned. "Sir, with respect, this is a private family matter." The man turned his cold eyes on him. "That is exactly why I will speak." Vanessa whispered, "Dad?" Every head in the hall snapped toward her. Chica blinked through her tears. "That?" The old man faced Connell fully now, gripping the head of his walking stick. "Young man," he said, "before you call this woman a liar in front of witnesses, I suggest you pray very hard that I do not say what I know." Connell's face lost color. For the first time since Chica entered the hall, he looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, realizing the ground beneath him was not ground at all. It was a trap. And whatever truth this man carried had the power to destroy everything. Connell opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then the old man reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a sealed brown envelope, and raised it for everyone to see. "This wedding," he said, "should stop right now. Because if I open this envelope, your groom will have nowhere left to hide." If this story has pulled you in, subscribe now, like this video, and share it with someone who loves powerful African stories. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and answer this. If you were standing in that hall, would you have spoken up or stayed silent? What comes after this moment will change everything. Nobody moved. The music had stopped completely now. Even the servers standing by the walls with trays in their hands looked frozen. All eyes were on the old man and the brown envelope in his hand. Connell tried to recover first. He forced out a dry laugh and spread his hands as if the whole thing had become some silly misunderstanding. "Sir, with due respect, I think emotions are running high. This is not the place for drama." But the old man did not sit down. He remained standing, calm and heavy with the kind of authority money alone could not buy. The room did not belong to Connell anymore. It belonged to him. Vanessa's face had changed too. The confidence she wore like expensive perfume had cracked. She looked from her father to Connell, then to Chica, as if the elegant wedding she had walked into was turning into something dark and unfamiliar right before her eyes. "Dad," she said carefully, "what is in that envelope?" The old man did not answer her immediately. Instead, he looked at Chica for a long second, and when he spoke, his voice softened just a little. "Young woman, before I say anything, I want to ask you one question. Did this man ever legally end his marriage to you?" Chica wiped her face with shaky fingers. "No, sir. Never. He left our home 8 months ago. At first he said he was trying to secure business deals and needed space. Then he stopped coming home. When I asked questions, he told me I was becoming a burden. Later, he sent money once or twice and then blocked my number." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Connell raised his voice. "She is twisting the story. We were separated. Everybody close to us knew it was over." "Separated is not divorced," the old man replied. Connell said nothing. That silence landed harder than any confession. Vanessa took another step away from him. "Connell," she said, and this time her tone had lost all warmth, "did you tell me you were a free man?" Connell turned to her quickly. "Vanessa, listen to me. I was going to explain everything. It's complicated." "Is it complicated?" she asked quietly. "Or did you lie?" He opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, one of the women seated near the front leaned toward another and whispered too loudly, "I knew something was off. A man rushing into society marriage like this?" The whisper spread. More voices joined. A wedding hall that had looked polished and perfect minutes ago now felt like a courtroom. Chica stood very still, but inside, her mind was racing. She had not expected help. She had only come because something inside her had refused to die quietly. She had imagined being dragged out in shame. She had imagined Connell insulting her, his new rich friends mocking her, the whole city hearing a version of the story that painted her as bitter and desperate. But she had not imagined this. She had not imagined that the powerful father of the bride would be the one holding the match near Connell's carefully built world. The old man finally lifted the envelope slightly. "Inside this," he said, Our documents, bank transfers, sworn statements, and one photograph your groom prayed never reached my hands. Connell's breathing visibly changed. Vanessa noticed it too. What photograph? She asked. Connell stepped forward. Sir, whatever game this is, I won't allow you to disgrace me. The old man's eyes hardened. Disgrace you? You walked into disgrace by yourself. A murmur of approval rose from some corners of the hall. Connell's mother suddenly stood up. Please, she said nervously, trying to smile, there is no need for this in front of everybody. Let us go inside and talk like family. That was when Chica turned slowly toward her mother-in-law. Family. The word burned. This was the same woman who once held Chica's hand in their tiny kitchen and called her daughter. The same woman who ate her food, accepted her respect, and prayed over her marriage. Yet she had sat in the front row of another woman's wedding to her son without a word. Chica looked her straight in the eye. Mama, when did I stop being family? The older woman's lips trembled, but she did not answer. That answer too was loud. Vanessa now looked pale with anger. Dad, I need to know what's going on. Her father nodded once. You will. But first, let everyone here hear the truth that should have been told before this day was planned. He pulled one document from the envelope and held it up. This is a copy of the marriage certificate between Connell Adeyemi and Chika Ease, registered legally in Lagos 4 years ago. A wave of gasps crashed across the room. Several guests who had been recording openly lifted their phones higher. Vanessa stared at Connell as though she no longer recognized his face. You married me while still married to someone else? It is not like that, he said quickly. Baby, I can explain. We were done long ago. The papers were just, don't call me baby, Vanessa cut in. Her voice was not loud, but it was sharp enough to silence the room again. The old man continued. Second, these bank transfers show that when this young woman, he gestured toward Chica, used her personal savings and signed a small cooperative loan to support your so-called early business, the money was not repaid to her. Chica blinked. She knew about the loan. She knew she had suffered for it. What she did not know was how far her sacrifice had traveled. The old man drew out another page. That same capital, he said, formed the earliest deposit into the shell company Connell later used to present himself to my daughter as a rising real estate entrepreneur. The hall erupted in louder whispers. Vanessa looked at Connell as if each new sentence was stripping away a costume he had worn before her. You told me your first investor was your uncle in Atlanta. Connell snapped, because saying my struggling wife helped me would have changed how people saw me. He froze the moment the words left his mouth. The entire room caught it. He had said it himself. Not partner. Not supporter. Not the woman who stood beside him. My struggling wife. Chica closed her eyes for 1 second. There was. The truth he had been hiding was not just greed. It was shame. He had become embarrassed by the same woman who once believed in him when nobody else did. When she opened her eyes again, tears were there, but something else had joined them. Vanessa's voice dropped low. So you buried her because you thought she did not fit the life you wanted? Connell ran a hand through his hair, his neat image cracking apart. Vanessa, you don't understand how this world works. People judge. They look at who you came from, who you are tied to, what kind of woman stands beside you. I worked hard to rise. Chica laughed softly, but the sound was painful. No, Connell. We worked hard. You just rose alone. That line settled heavily in the room. Even the MC looked away. Then the old man pulled out the final item from the envelope. A photograph. From where Chica stood, she could not see it clearly at first. But the moment Vanessa's father looked at it, then at Connell, his expression turned to disgust. What is it? Vanessa asked. The old man did not hand it to her. This picture was taken 6 months ago, he said. At a private dinner in Ikoyi. My security team took it because they had begun quietly checking the man who wanted to marry my daughter. Connell's entire body went tense. The old man lifted the photograph high enough for those closest to see. Vanessa stepped closer and then stopped cold. Her face drained of color. No, she whispered. Chica strained to understand. She saw only enough to notice Connell seated at a table with a woman in red, his arm around her shoulders, smiling with the relaxed intimacy of someone very comfortable. But it was not Vanessa. And it was not Chica. A third woman. Vanessa looked up slowly. Who is she? Cunnell did not answer. The old man's voice came like iron. That is not the right question. The right question is this. How many lives did this man intend to build with lies before one finally caught up with him? The room exploded again. Guests stood. Some moved closer. Some shook their heads. One elderly auntie muttered, Jesus, 3 women? Cunnell's polished image was gone now. Sweat shone on his forehead. He reached for Vanessa's arm, but she pulled back so fast it was as if his touch had become fire. Don't touch me, she said. For the first time, fear gave way to desperation on Cunnell's face. He looked at Chica, then at Vanessa, then at the old man, as if trying to find one weak point he could still control. But the hall was no longer listening to his excuses. And Chica realized something that both frightened and steadied her at the same time. This was bigger than her pain. Whatever Cunnell had been hiding was deeper than abandonment, deeper than shame, deeper even than marrying another woman for money. There was another secret, another woman, another life. And just as Vanessa's father lowered the photograph, a phone rang loudly in the silence. It was Cunnell's. His eyes widened when he saw the caller ID. Before he could reject the call, the screen lit up for Vanessa, Chica, and everyone nearest to see. My wife. Not Chica. Not Vanessa. Someone else. For a second, nobody breathed. Cunnell stared at his phone like it had turned into a snake in his hand. The bright screen kept glowing in the middle of the ruined wedding hall, exposing him more cruelly than any accusation had. The words were simple. 2 words. But they landed like thunder. My wife. Vanessa let out a short, broken laugh that carried no amusement at all. Your wife, she repeated, her voice low and deadly calm. Which one? A few guests covered their mouths. Others turned fully now, no longer pretending to be polite witnesses. The wedding had become a public unmasking, and everyone in that room knew they were seeing the kind of scandal people would whisper about for years. Cunnell quickly pressed the screen off, but it was too late. The old man looked at him with deep disappointment. Answer the question. Cunnell's lips moved before sound came. It's not what you think. That only made things worse. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. Then say what it is. He glanced around the room, calculating, desperate, searching for some version of the story that could still save him. But there were too many eyes on him now. Too many pieces already on the floor. One more lie and the whole building would collapse. Chica watched him in silence. The tears on her face had dried. What remained now was a strange numbness. It was as if her heart had cried past pain and entered a colder place. She thought she had come here to confront betrayal. But what stood before her was something uglier. This was not a man who had simply fallen in love with another woman. This was a man who had been collecting lives, promises, and women the way some people collect expensive watches, each one useful for a different image, a different room, a different season. Vanessa's father took one step forward. Put the phone on speaker. Cunnell shook his head. Sir, please. Let me handle this privately. The old man's grip tightened on his walking stick. You lost the right to privacy when you built your future on deception. The phone started ringing again. Same caller. My wife. Every muscle in Cunnell's face tightened. He looked like a man being chased toward a cliff with nowhere left to run. Slowly, under the pressure of the room, he accepted the call. He did not put it on speaker. But before he could even lift it to his ear, a woman's voice burst through loud enough for those closest to hear. Cunnell, why are you rejecting my calls? I've been waiting here with your brother for almost an hour. Did you tell them about us or not? The nearest guest gasped. Vanessa took another slow step back. Chica felt her stomach twist. Cunnell jerked the phone away and ended the call, but the damage was done. The room had heard enough. Vanessa looked at him as if she were trying to understand what kind of man she had allowed near her life. Who is that woman? Cunnell's mouth opened, then shut again. Who is she? Vanessa repeated. Finally he spoke. Her name is Tonia. The room stayed silent. She lives in Port Harcourt, he continued, his voice flat now, as if every sentence cost him something. I met her last year through a transport contract. She introduced me to some people. I told her we would settle things. Settle what things? Vanessa asked. Connell hesitated. Then Chica understood before he even said it. Her stomach dropped. Connell spoke without looking at anyone. Bride price was paid. The hall exploded. Vanessa's bridesmaid swore under her breath. Someone at the back shouted, Jesus! Connell's mother sat down heavily, covering her face with her galley wrapper. One of the uncles who had been smiling proudly earlier now stared at the floor like he wanted it to open. Vanessa looked at her father, then back at Connell. You paid another woman's bride price while planning to marry me? Connell tried again to defend himself. It was not complete. It wasn't formal the way you think. It was just introduction and family pressure and did you tell her about me? Vanessa cut in. Connell said nothing. And did you tell her about Chica? Still nothing. Vanessa gave one long exhale, then laughed again, but this time the sound was almost frightening. So all three of us were standing in different rooms with the same man, each being sold a different future. Chica lowered her eyes. That sentence was brutal because it was true. A young woman in the crowd whispered, "This is why people fear trusting anybody now." The old man opened the envelope again. "There is one more thing." Connell looked up sharply, panic returning in full force. "Sir, please." But Vanessa's father had already removed another document. "When my investigators began checking your financial claims, we found that 2 of the luxury properties you presented to my daughter as assets under your control are not yours." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "What?" Connell moved toward him. "That's a lie." The old man did not even flinch. "One belongs to a development group in Victoria Island. The other is leased under a temporary operating agreement through a third party. You used staged access, borrowed vehicles, and manipulated photographs to present a level of wealth you did not own. Now even the guests who had been enjoying the scandal as gossip turned serious. This was no longer only a family disgrace. It was fraud dressed as romance." Vanessa looked around the hall slowly, as if seeing the decorations, the high society guests, even herself, from a distance. "So this wedding was not just built on lies," she said. "It was financed by them." Connell's voice cracked for the first time. "I was close, Vanessa. I just needed one more step. One more connection. Once this deal went through, everything would have become real." Chica stared at him. There was not love, not confusion, not weakness, calculation. He had used her for survival, Tonia for access, and Vanessa for arrival. The old man's expression turned to stone. "You did not come for my daughter. You came for the door you thought she would open." Vanessa slowly removed the engagement ring from her finger. The movement was small, but the room felt it. Connell saw it too. "Vanessa, don't do this." She held the ring between 2 fingers and looked at it for a moment. "Do what? Refuse to join the collection?" Then she let the ring drop. It hit the polished floor with a tiny sound, but in the silence that followed, it seemed louder than a gunshot. Connell bent instinctively, but before he could touch it, Vanessa's father placed his walking stick over it. "No," he said. Connell straightened, breathing hard. Then, from the entrance of the hall, came sudden commotion. Heads turned. A few guests moved aside. One of the ushers rushed toward the door, then stopped in confusion. A woman was walking in. She was tall, dark-skinned, visibly angry, and dressed in a fitted wine-colored gown that looked like it had been chosen in a hurry. Behind her came a stocky middle-aged man and a younger man Chica vaguely recognized from old family gatherings. Connell went completely still. The woman's eyes locked on him from across the hall, and even before she spoke, everyone knew exactly who she was. Tonia, the woman from the call. She stopped at the center aisle, taking in the wedding decoration, the guests, Vanessa in her dress, Chica near the front, and Connell standing at the center of it all like a man caught in his own net. Then Tonia looked at him and said, loud and clear, "So this is the emergency meeting you left me for?" Nobody in the hall even tried to hide their reaction now. And when Tonia reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded document, lifting it high with shaking fingers, Chica felt another storm gathering. Because whatever Tonia had brought, it made Cunnel look more terrified than he had all day. And that could only mean one thing. The worst truth had still not come out. If this revelation shocked you, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with a friend who enjoys gripping emotional drama. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and answer this. At this point, do you think Cunnel's worst secret is already out, or is something even more dangerous still hiding? What unfolds after this is even heavier. Tonia did not wait for permission. She walked straight down the aisle with the stiff, burning anger of a woman who had just discovered that humiliation had been prepared for her in public. The stocky middle-aged man behind her looked like an uncle or older relative, the kind of man who did not speak often but whose silence alone could make people nervous. The younger man beside him was clearly furious too. Cunnel took one small step backward. That alone told the room everything. Tonia stopped a few feet from him and looked around once more, almost as if she needed to confirm that what she was seeing was real. The decorated hall. The flowers. The cameras. Vanessa standing in a wedding dress. Chica near the front with her face swollen from tears. Then her eyes returned to Cunnel. "You told me your investor was forcing you into a meeting," she said. "You said your phone would be off because of negotiations. So tell me, Cunnel, which part of this is negotiation?" Nobody answered. Tonia laughed bitterly. "No, speak. I left Port Harcourt this morning because your brother finally grew a conscience and picked my call. I thought maybe there was some explanation. Some mistake. But this." She pointed at the stage. "This is what you were doing while I was at home defending you to my family." Cunnel tried to lower his voice, perhaps hoping to shrink the disaster. "Tonia, calm down. This is not the place." She stepped closer. "You don't get to tell me where the place is. You made this place." The older man behind her cleared his throat. "Young man, my family asked you direct questions before any introduction was allowed. Were you married? Were you entangled anywhere? Were there obligations? You said no. You looked elders in the face and said no." Cunnel's mouth opened, then shut again. Tonia slowly lifted the folded document in her hand. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. "This is the list your own people signed when they came to my father's house. Drinks, yams, kush, wrappers, goats, everything brought for my introduction. Your family didn't just discuss marriage. They began it." Vanessa's eyes shifted sharply to Cunnel's mother. The older woman could not hold the gaze. Chica felt a chill move through her body. She had suspected betrayal. She had not imagined this level of organized deceit. This was not one lie. It was a whole structure. Family members had entered rooms, eaten food, smiled at elders, received blessings, and walked away keeping secrets. Cunnel finally found his voice. It was pressure. "Tonia, you know how families can be. It wasn't finalized." Tonia stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Pressure?" she repeated. "So when you held my hand in front of my parents and promised we would wed before the year ended, that was pressure? When you sent me fabric and said I should start preparing quietly, that was pressure? When you told me to trust you because you were building a bigger future for us, that was pressure too." Every sentence pushed him lower. Vanessa, who had been silent for several seconds, now spoke. "How many women were financing your hope while you sold each one a different dream?" Cunnel turned toward her. "Vanessa, I know how this looks." That line actually drew laughter from some of the guests. "How it looks?" Vanessa said. "It looks like you built a business plan out of women's trust." The old man nodded once, almost grimly. "Exactly." Cunnel looked from face to face, realizing he had lost the room completely. "Listen to all of you," he snapped. "You are acting like I murdered someone. Relationships are complicated. People separate, people move on, families interfere. It is messy." Chica took a step forward then. For the first time since entering the hall, her voice came out without shaking. "No, Cunnel. Hunger is messy. Building a life from nothing is messy. Real struggle is messy. This is not messy. This is deliberate." The room quieted again. She kept going. "You knew what you were doing each time you looked at a woman and told her exactly what she needed to hear. You knew when you let me wait at home like a fool. You knew when you stood before Vanessa's family pretending to be clean. You knew when you visited Tonia and spoke of marriage. Stop calling wickedness confusion. That landed heavily. Tonia looked at Chica then, truly looked at her for the first time. There was pain in that look, but also recognition. Not friendship. Not yet. Just the hard understanding of women who had been wounded by the same hand. Cunnell's younger brother, the one who had come in with Tonia, suddenly spoke from near the aisle. She's right. All heads turned. He looked uncomfortable, like a man stepping into fire because staying silent had become worse. I should have spoken earlier, he said. I knew pieces of it. Not everything. But enough. I kept hoping my brother would clean it up before it exploded. Cunnell's eyes blazed. Shut up. But his brother continued. Mama knew about Tonia. I knew he still wasn't divorced from Chica. None of us knew he had gone as far as this wedding with Vanessa. When I saw the invitation yesterday, I knew it was over. Cunnell's mother stood halfway, then sank back down again. Vanessa's father looked at her with controlled disgust. Madam, you sat in this hall as though all of this was normal? Tears filled her eyes, but Chica felt nothing for them. Some tears come too late. We thought, Cunnell's mother began weakly. We thought he would settle one matter before the other became public. The whole room reacted at once. Vanessa shook her head slowly in disbelief. So the plan was not truth. The plan was timing. No one could deny it. Chica remembered all the times she had gone to Cunnell's family house asking careful, embarrassed questions after he disappeared more and more. Each time they had told her to be patient, to pray, to avoid fighting her husband publicly. She had thought they were protecting the marriage. Now she understood they were protecting the performance. Tonia unfolded her document and held it out, but not to Cunnell. She gave it to Vanessa's father. Read the date. He glanced down. His face hardened further. Introduction ceremony acknowledgement. Dated 4 months ago. Vanessa laughed softly, but the sound was full of hurt. 4 months ago? That was when you were flying to Houston to see me and talking about destiny. Cunnell rubbed his face. He looked cornered now, stripped down to something desperate and ugly. All of you are pretending life is simple. Do you know how hard it is for a man trying to rise? Everybody wants something. Respect, money, stability, family expectations, social class. One wrong move and doors close. Tonia folded her arms. So you used women as ladders. He glared at her. I did what I had to do. The hall reacted like one body. That sentence removed the last bit of cover. No more romance. No more misunderstanding. Just naked ambitions speaking plainly. Vanessa looked at him with cold clarity. Thank you, she said. He frowned, confused. For what? For finally saying the truth without perfume. Chica felt something shift inside her then. The pain was still there, but it was changing shape. Less like a knife. More like a scar beginning to close. The man before her was not a mystery anymore. That was a strange kind of freedom. The older relative who came with Tonia stepped forward. Since we are speaking plainly, let us finish it plainly. My niece is pregnant. The word struck the hall like lightning. For 1 second, even Cunnell looked empty. Then everything moved at once. Guests burst into shocked whispers. Vanessa's bridesmaid covered her mouth. Chica felt her knees weaken and reached for the back of a chair. Cunnell's mother let out a broken cry. Tonia did not look at anyone else. She kept her eyes on Cunnell. Yes, she said. Pregnant. 11 weeks. I was going to tell you after today because you said you were finalizing something important for our future. I didn't know that future already had 2 other women standing inside it. Cunnell looked stunned, but not in the way a joyful man would. More like a man whose calculations had just been set on fire. Vanessa saw it too. You're not even happy, she said quietly. You just look trapped. Tonia's face hardened. That's because a child was never part of his timing. Cunnell snapped back to life. Enough. You can't just walk in here and throw accusations around. Tonia's uncle moved so fast 2 ushers stepped between them. Mind yourself, the man warned. Do not call my niece a liar when we have messages, receipts, and your voice notes. Voice notes. Again the room shifted. Vanessa's father turned slowly to Cunnel. There are recordings? Tonia nodded. Plenty. Him promising marriage. Him discussing dates. Him talking about his mother's approval. Him saying the woman from his past was no longer in the picture. Chica closed her eyes briefly. The woman from his past. That was what she had become in his mouth. Not the wife who built beside him. Just a past he hoped to erase. When she opened her eyes, Vanessa was staring at her. In that look there was sorrow now and respect too. They had met today as strangers standing on different sides of a man's lie. Yet the lie had dragged them onto the same ground. Vanessa turned to her father. "End this." He nodded. Then he faced the MC, the decorators, the musicians, the security men, everyone. "This event is over. No vows will happen here today. Anyone recording for gossip should remember that a woman's humiliation is not entertainment. Leave with sense." Some people quickly lowered their phones. But before the hall could begin to empty, Cunnel moved toward Vanessa in panic. "Please, don't do this in front of everyone. Let us talk inside. I can explain the property issue. I can fix the rest." She stared at him in disbelief. "The rest?" "Yes," he said quickly, almost breathless now. "I can settle Tonia. I can sort things out with Chica. This can still be managed." Managed. Not healed. Not confessed. Managed. That one word disgusted even the people who had been closest to him. Chica straightened up slowly. Tonia's jaw tightened. Vanessa's expression turned to ice. Vanessa said, "There it is again. Women are not people to you. We are problems to arrange." Then she stepped aside, and for the first time Cunnel saw no path leading through her anymore. He turned toward Chica, perhaps out of instinct, perhaps hoping the woman who had once loved him most would still show softness. "Chica, no," she said. He stopped. There was no shouting in her voice. No tears. Just finality. "You don't get to use my name now as though it still belongs in your mouth." The silence that followed was deep. Then Tonia reached into her bag again and brought out a small envelope. "Since today is a day for unfinished truths," she said, "there is one more thing." Cunnel's face changed instantly. It was not confusion this time. It was fear. Pure, immediate fear. Tonia looked at Chica, then Vanessa, then the room. "I found this 2 weeks ago in his travel bag. I asked him about it, and he nearly snatched it from my hand. Later he said it was old paperwork and nothing important. I believed him then. I don't anymore." She handed the envelope to Vanessa's father. He opened it carefully and pulled out several folded pages. His eyes moved across the first sheet. Then he froze. The room waited. Even Cunnel did not breathe. The old man looked up very slowly, and when he did, the disgust on his face had become something darker. "What have you done?" he asked. Cunnel whispered, "Sir," but the old man raised the document and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "These are transfer papers. This fool tried to use false marital representations and forged beneficiary details to position himself near assets that were never his." The hall erupted again. Chica's head spun. Vanessa's face went completely still. Tonia stepped back in disbelief. And Cunnel, finally seeing that the truth had gone past scandal and entered something far more dangerous, looked toward the exit like a man thinking of escape. Because whatever was written on those pages was bad enough to make even his own courage leave him. And that meant what was coming would not just be about betrayal. It would be about the full price of it. Cunnel looked at the exit. It was not a dramatic movement. Just a quick turn of the head, a flicker of instinct. But in a room where every eye was already fixed on him, even that tiny motion said too much. He was no longer thinking like a groom whose wedding had gone wrong. He was thinking like a man whose secrets had become dangerous. Vanessa's father saw it immediately. "Stand where you are," he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise in the hall with the clean force of authority. 2 security men near the doors straightened at once. They did not touch Cunnel, but they shifted just enough to make it clear that leaving would not be simple. Cunnel turned back slowly. Sweat shone at his temples now, and the expensive confidence he had worn all day was gone. In its place was something raw. Not remorse. Survival. Vanessa stepped closer to her father. What exactly is in those papers? He looked down at the documents again, his face set. Draft transfer requests, identity declarations, and supporting notes. He paused, as if even he disliked saying the rest aloud. He appears to have been positioning himself to gain indirect access to controlled family assets through marital representation and beneficiary channels. The words were formal, but the meaning hit hard. Vanessa stared at Connell. You were trying to attach yourself to my family's money before the marriage even happened? Connell shook his head quickly. No. It's not like that. Those papers were samples. Just preparatory materials. People in business keep templates for many scenarios. Nobody believed him. Tonia folded her arms. Templates? So you just keep forged personal details in your travel bag for decoration? A few bitter laughs rose from the guests. Chica stood still, but inside, her thoughts were moving fast. She remembered the last year of her marriage with painful clarity now. Connell had become obsessed with appearance. His phone was always face down. He had started talking about networks, positioning, social value, class movement. At first, she thought he was simply growing ambitious. Then he became embarrassed by ordinary things. The old chairs in their sitting room. Her modest clothes. Her small trading business. Even the way she spoke in front of his new friends. Back then, she had blamed herself in secret. She told herself maybe she was not polished enough, not educated enough, not beautiful enough to stand beside the kind of man he was trying to become. Now, standing in that ruined wedding hall, she saw the truth clearly. The problem had never been that she was too small. The problem was that he had become too hollow. Vanessa's father held up one of the pages. This signature block references my daughter as spouse-linked party. This note here discusses anticipated access after formal union. And this, he said, lifting another sheet, contains false declarations inconsistent with your actual financial position. Vanessa's face hardened further with each sentence. So while you were calling me your future, you were already planning what my name could unlock. Connell tried again. I was planning for us. Vanessa's answer came instantly. No. You were planning through me. That landed with brutal precision. Connell looked around as though he might still find sympathy somewhere in the room. But the room had turned on him fully now. Even the relatives who had probably once admired his rise were avoiding his eyes. The musicians stood awkwardly near their equipment. The decorators whispered among themselves. A few guests had begun quietly leaving, but most stayed. People always stayed when truth came wearing the face of spectacle. Then Chica noticed something strange. Connell's mother was crying, yes, but not only with shame. There was fear in her face too. The kind that comes when exposure is wider than expected. Chica looked at her carefully. Mama, she said. The older woman flinched. What else do you know? Connell turned sharply. Leave her out of this. That reaction answered too much on its own. Vanessa's father narrowed his eyes. Madam, this would be a good time to speak truth while truth still has some dignity left. Connell's mother pressed a trembling hand to her chest. I did not know about papers, she said weakly. I swear. I only knew he was moving too fast. Tonia let out a cold breath. You knew enough to sit in this hole. The older woman began to cry harder. He said once he married into peace, everything would settle. Into peace? Chica repeated softly. But inside, anger rose. Not loud anger. Not the kind that burns outward. This was quieter and sharper. The realization that some people had watched wrong unfold and kept calling it strategy because they hoped it would end in comfort. Vanessa's father turned one page over and read silently for a few seconds. Then his expression changed again. Interesting. Vanessa looked at him. What? He lifted his eyes to Connell. You were bold enough to draft these materials. But you were careless too. Connell said nothing. The old man held out a page. There is correspondence here with someone named Mr. Bassi. He appears to have advised on documentation structure. Who is he? Connell's jaw tightened. Who is he? The old man repeated. Finally Connell muttered, "A consultant." Tonia laughed. "A consultant for marriage fraud?" Vanessa's father ignored the interruption. This consultant also wrote that timing depended on prior obligations being neutralized. What does that mean? The room went still. Even Connell seemed caught off guard by the phrase now being read aloud. Chica felt the hairs on her arms rise. Neutralized. Not ended. Not resolved. Neutralized. Like she had been some obstacle in a roadmap. Connell's voice came lower now. It means nothing. Just language. But Chica no longer believed that any word around him was casual. Every word had purpose. Every silence had purpose too. She stepped forward. "When you stopped answering my calls, you told me to stay quiet because public noise could damage your opportunities. When I went to your family, they told me to be patient. When rent was due, you sent little money and then vanished again. I thought you were abandoning responsibility." Her eyes locked on his. "Now I'm wondering if you were doing more than that. Were you trying to erase me officially without my knowledge?" Connell looked away. That was enough. A murmur moved through the hall. Vanessa's father lowered the document slowly. "Young woman," he said to Chica, "did you sign anything recently? Any forms, account confirmations, or legal papers he brought under another excuse?" Chica searched her memory. Then something cold passed through her. 3 months ago, Connell had come to the apartment unexpectedly. He had been unusually soft that day, almost like the man she used to know. He brought groceries. Asked about her health. Said he was trying to settle old matters and needed her signature on a document linked to a cooperative account they had once used early in the business. She had refused at first because the papers were incomplete. He had grown irritated, then covered it quickly with a smile. Later he said he would return with clearer copies. He never did. Chica slowly shook her head. "No. I didn't sign." For the first time all day, real frustration flashed across Connell's face. Not pain. Not regret. Frustration. Vanessa saw it too. Her expression changed from hurt to disgust. "You failed with her, so you came hunting bigger." Nobody in that room could argue with that. Connell suddenly exploded. "Do you all think money falls from the sky? Do you think doors open because you are honest? I was tired. Tired of being looked down on. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of standing outside circles where fools born into comfort acted like they were chosen by God. I wanted more. I wanted in." The hall stayed silent, but not because he had moved anyone. It was the silence people give when someone finally says the ugliest truth plainly. Chica looked at him with a kind of sorrow that no longer belonged to marriage. "Wanting more is not the sin," she said. "Deciding that other people's hearts are tools is." Tonia nodded. "Exactly." Vanessa's father folded the papers once, very neatly. "Ambition can be respected. Predation cannot." That sentence settled the matter in the room more than any shouting could have. Then Tonia's uncle stepped forward again. "My niece is carrying a child. This man lied to her family. If there are legal implications here, we will follow them. If there are customary consequences, we will follow those too. But we will not leave this place pretending this is only a lover's quarrel." Connell swallowed hard. He was beginning to understand that the collapse was moving beyond reputation now. It had entered records, families, possible legal questions, financial tracing, public witnesses, things harder to silence. Vanessa turned to Chica fully. "I owe you an apology." Chica blinked. Vanessa continued, voice steady though her eyes were wet. "I did not know you. But I stood smiling in a place that was built on your humiliation. Even without knowing, I was part of the picture that hurt you. I am sorry." The hall quieted again for a different reason this time. Chica looked at her. All morning, Vanessa had been the shining rich woman who seemed to have taken everything from her. But now she saw another truth. Vanessa had also been used. Chosen not out of love, but because of the doors around her. Dressed in white for a trap she didn't build. Chica nodded slowly. "You didn't know." Vanessa's eyes held hers. "No. But now I do." Something passed between them then. Not friendship. Not yet. but respect born from standing in the wreckage of the same lie. Connell saw it and looked almost offended, as though even now he could not understand how the women he had set against each other were refusing to stay divided. Then one of the security men approached Vanessa's father and murmured something low. The old man frowned. "Who?" The guard answered quietly. The old man looked toward the entrance. "Send him in." A few seconds later, a short, nervous-looking man in glasses entered the hall, clutching a leather folder to his chest. He looked like he wished the ground would swallow him. The moment Connell saw him, his face changed. "Bassie," he said. So this was the consultant. Mr. Bassie stopped several feet away, eyes moving from the broken wedding setup to the cluster of women around Connell. Then to the papers in the old man's hand. He seemed to understand immediately that whatever story had brought him here was already over. Vanessa's father asked, "Did you assist this man in drafting false representations tied to my daughter's prospective marriage?" Mr. Bassie hesitated too long. Connell snapped, "Don't say a word." But the little man looked terrified, and terrified people often choose self-preservation over loyalty. "I am a documentation advisor," he said carefully. "He approached me for strategic structuring around upcoming family transitions. He did not present it as fraud." Vanessa's father's eyes hardened. "What did he present it as?" Bassie licked his lips. "As marital consolidation planning." The phrase was so cold, so calculated, that even the guests nearest the aisle reacted. Tonia muttered, "He talks about women like property files." Bassie continued, voice shaking now. "He said there were previous relationships that would soon become irrelevant. He wanted guidance on how certain declarations might be timed after a ceremony." Chica felt the room tilt around her. Previous relationships. Irrelevant. That was how he had translated human beings into paperwork. Connell lunged a step toward Bassie. "You fool!" The security men moved in at once, blocking him. Vanessa's father said, "Enough." And suddenly the hall fell so quiet that everyone heard the sound of Connell's own breathing. Then Bassie opened the folder in his hands. "I brought something because I got worried after seeing news of the wedding online this morning," he said. "I thought it best to protect myself." He removed a small stack of photocopied messages. Copies of his instructions. Connell went still. Too still. That kind of stillness was worse than shouting. Because everyone could see it now. The real fear was not about shame anymore. It was about evidence. Vanessa's father took the papers and scanned the first page. His jaw hardened so sharply that Vanessa stepped closer. "What is it?" He did not answer immediately. Then he looked up at Connell and said, "You did not only plan to benefit from marriage. You planned to declare one of these women unstable if they resisted." The room broke into shocked voices. Chica's blood ran cold. Tonia stepped forward. "What?" The old man read aloud from the message in his hand. "Needs safest route if first wife becomes emotional and starts disturbing. Also need angle if PH woman creates noise later. Prefer approach that makes both look unreliable while formal union proceeds." Silence. Then Chica heard her own heartbeat. Not because she was surprised by cruelty anymore, but because she was finally seeing its full design. This man had not simply abandoned, lied, and performed love in different cities. He had been planning the next stage already. How to discredit them. How to make truth sound like instability. How to erase women cleanly after using them. Connell opened his mouth, but no words came. And in that terrible silence, every person in the hall understood the same thing at once. The marriage lie was only the surface. The real story underneath was far darker. And when Chica lifted her eyes to his face again, she saw it too. He was not shocked because he had been misunderstood. He was shocked because the mask had come off too early. After the message was read aloud, the hall changed. Until that moment, many people had still been treating the disaster as a scandal, a social collapse, a rich wedding gone wrong. But that single message pulled the matter into a different light. It was no longer only about a man lying to women. It was about a man planning how to destroy their credibility once the lies started cracking. Nobody looked at Connell the same way again. Not Vanessa. Not Tonia. Not Chica. Not even his own family. He stood there breathing hard, but the energy around him had shifted from outrage to caution. People were no longer just disgusted. They were alert. Because once someone is willing to prepare false stories about others, no one can be sure how far he might go. Connell tried one last time to recover himself. "Those messages are being twisted," he said. I was frustrated. Anybody can say something badly in private. That does not mean I planned anything. Mr. Bassey looked miserable, but he did not step back. "You asked for language that would weaken them if they spoke," he said quietly. "You asked whether emotional distress could affect how people perceived legal complaints. You asked whether silence could be bought more cheaply before marriage than after." The room reacted with a low collective sound, half shock, half disgust. Vanessa closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them again, something inside her had settled. The hurt was still there, but it had become disciplined. "So the plan was bigger than charm," she said. "You had steps. Sequence. Contingencies." Connell shook his head. "No, yes," Chica said. He looked at her sharply. She held his gaze. "Because now I remember things clearly." The room quieted again. She took a slow breath. Her voice was steady, but every sentence seemed to rise from somewhere deep. "When you first started changing, you did not leave all at once. You tested distance little by little. Some days you came home soft, apologetic, almost like before. Other times you were cold and irritated, like my presence offended you. I thought it was pressure from work." She paused. "Now I know you were studying reactions." Connell's face tightened. Chica continued. "When I cried, you called me dramatic. When I asked questions, you said I was insecure. When I insisted on honesty, you said I was trying to sabotage your future. You were already training the story. You wanted any pain I showed to look like instability." The words struck hard because they were ordinary. Too ordinary. Many in the room had seen the same pattern in smaller forms before. That was what made it chilling. Vanessa nodded slowly. "He did the same with me, just with better clothes." Everyone turned toward her. She lifted her chin. "Any time I asked about details that did not add up, he would smile and say I had trust issues because of my past relationships. He said successful men were always misunderstood by suspicious women. He would go quiet for hours and then return sweet, making me feel guilty for doubting him." Her mouth tightened. "He was managing perception with all of us." Tonia laughed once, bitterly. "And with me he used family language. Respect. Timing. Pressure. He kept saying a decent woman does not rush a man who is building. So even when things felt wrong, he made caution look like disloyalty. That was the moment the whole shape of it became plain. Different women. Different language. Same method. Connell had not been improvising. He had been tailoring. Using class with one woman, guilt with another, patience with another. Whatever kept each one quiet long enough for the next lie to mature. Vanessa's father looked at him with open contempt now. "You understood people well enough to manipulate them, but not well enough to predict what happens when truth reaches the same room." Connell said nothing. Chica studied him carefully. She had once loved this man so much that she believed his silence was depth. His ambition was vision. His intensity was purpose. Now, stripped of costume, he looked smaller. Not because he lacked intelligence. He had intelligence. That was the frightening part. He had simply surrendered it to appetite. And appetite is never satisfied. It only becomes bolder. Tonia's uncle stepped forward again. "There needs to be clarity before people leave this place and start rewriting what happened. My niece is pregnant. This woman," he gestured respectfully toward Chica, "is the legal wife. Your daughter," he nodded to Vanessa's father, "was drawn into a fraudulent marriage plan. And this man," he said, turning back toward Connell, "used different forms of commitment to secure status, money, and access. Let witnesses hear it plainly now." The old man nodded once. "Agreed." Then he turned to the hall and spoke with the force of someone used to being heard. "Everyone present should understand this clearly. No lawful marriage between my daughter and this man will occur. Any suggestion otherwise is false. The event is terminated. Any financial or legal matter connected to misrepresentation will be reviewed." That announcement seemed to release something. Guests began murmuring in more organized clusters now. A few slipped out, already carrying the story into the city. Others stayed because they sensed there was more yet to come. And there was. Because Connell's younger brother suddenly stepped forward again, holding his phone. His face looked pale. "Mama," he said quietly, "I think they've already started talking outside." Connell's mother looked up weakly. "Talking how?" He swallowed. "Someone posted a clip." Of course they had. In a room full of phones, with a bride in white, a first wife in tears, another woman arriving from Port Harcourt, and papers exposing fraud, silence was never going to leave the building intact. Vanessa's father closed his eyes briefly, not in surprise but irritation. "Who posted it?" The young man shook his head. "I don't know. But it's spreading fast." Connell suddenly lunged toward him. "Give me that phone." The security men blocked him immediately. "Enough," Vanessa said. Her voice was not raised, but it carried across the hall with clean force. Everyone turned. She looked at Connell with a calm that was more frightening than anger. "Your first instinct is still control. Delete. Suppress. Manage. That is all you know." For the first time, Connell looked truly cornered by something he could not threaten or charm. "What do you want me to do?" he burst out. "Stand here and let my whole life burn?" Chica answered before anyone else. "You built your life over other people's ashes. Why should fire shock you now?" The hall went still again. Connell stared at her. She stared back, and in that moment, something changed inside him too. She could see it. Not repentance. Not exactly. More like the realization that she was no longer available as emotional shelter. She would not be the soft place he returned to after wrecking everything else. That door had shut. Tonia stepped nearer as well. "And let me be clear too. No one will bury my voice under shame. I will not protect your name because of the child I'm carrying. If anything, I will be louder because of that child." Connell flinched at the sentence, "that child." Fatherhood sounded heavier when spoken by someone no longer asking him for tenderness. Vanessa removed the gelly from one of her bridesmaids' hands and placed it on a chair. Then she began taking off pieces of her bridal jewelry one by one. Earrings. Bracelet. Necklace. She did it calmly, with no rush, no shaking. The room watched in silence. Every small metallic sound felt symbolic. When she was done, she looked less like a bride and more like herself. "I almost tied my future to someone who sees people as useful or inconvenient," she said. "That is not heartbreak. That is rescue arriving before the door locked." Her father's face softened for the first time. Not because the pain was small, but because the truth had come before the permanent step. Chica heard that and felt a strange tightening in her throat. Rescue before the door locked. How different life might have been if she too had seen clearly earlier. Yet regret has no mercy. It only teaches. She could not go back and save the younger version of herself who believed patience could cure betrayal. But she could refuse to lose the rest of her life to that mistake. That thought steadied her. Then Mr. Bassey, still standing awkwardly with his folder, cleared his throat again. "There is another matter." Everybody turned. He looked frightened to even continue, but he did. "He asked me something else 2 weeks ago. I refused." Connell shut his eyes briefly. Vanessa's father said, "Speak." Bassey took out one final sheet, not a message this time but notes in his own handwriting. He wanted to know whether a man could publicly announce that a prior marriage was customary only and therefore insignificant if no influential witnesses came forward. Chica's entire body went cold. Connell opened his eyes quickly. "That's not what I said." Bassey answered at once. "It is exactly what you asked." Now the room's disgust deepened into something heavier. Not only had Connell planned to discredit Chica emotionally, he had tried to shrink her marriage itself. Reduce her years to a technicality. Turn a life built together into something dismissible because she lacked power. Chica felt the blow of it, but this time it did not break her. It clarified everything. She stepped forward until she stood only a few feet from him. "You are going to erase me in stages," she said. "First with silence. Then with absence. Then with money too small to sustain me but enough to make outsiders think you were trying. Then with another woman. Then with the story that I was unstable. And finally with the lie that what we had barely counted. Her voice stayed quiet. Tell me something, Connell. When exactly did I stop being human to you? He looked at her, and for the first time all day he had no performance ready. His answer, when it came, was almost worse for its weakness. It wasn't like that at first. Chica stared at him. Not because it excused anything. Because it revealed the most dangerous truth of all. People do not always begin monstrous. Sometimes they begin ordinary, then keep choosing themselves over conscience until one day they can no longer recognize the line they crossed. Vanessa seemed to hear the same thing. That may be the only honest sentence you've said today, she said. And it condemns you more than the lies. Tonia nodded. Because it means you watched yourself changing and still continued. Connell's shoulders dropped slightly then. Not in surrender, but in exhaustion. The fight was leaving him. Not the consequences. Just the illusion that he could still talk his way above them. The hall, too, had changed from hot chaos to something quieter and sharper. Decisions were forming now. Not just feelings. Chica could sense it. Vanessa's family would not bury this. Tonia's family would not bury this. And she herself no longer wanted quiet at any cost. For too long, silence had been sold to women as dignity. Sometimes silence is just unpaid labor for a liar's comfort. Vanessa's father turned to Chica. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? The question caught her off guard. She nodded slowly. Yes. With my cousin in Yaba, if needed. Good, he said. Then to Tonia, and you? My uncle's place, she said. He nodded. No one leaves alone. Not tonight. That instruction was not dramatic. It was practical. Protective. And because of the evidence already read, everyone understood why it mattered. The collapse of a manipulator can be unpredictable. Connell looked up sharply. What is that supposed to mean? The old man met his eyes. It means trust has left the building before you did. No one argued. Then Connell's phone began vibrating again. This time nobody rushed him to answer. The sound itself felt ugly now, like another loose wire sparking in a house already on fire. He looked down at the screen and went pale. His brother leaned slightly, saw the name, and cursed under his breath. Vanessa's father noticed. Who is it now? The younger brother hesitated, then said, Chairman Obiora. A few older guests reacted immediately. That was not a casual name. That was one of the business figures Connell had been trying to impress for months. A man connected to one of the major deals he had boasted about endlessly. Connell rejected the call. The phone rang again almost immediately. Then a message entered. His brother, still close enough to glimpse it, read silently and looked up in shock. What? Connell snapped. The younger man looked at him with something like pity now. The chairman says all pending discussions are suspended until further notice. He says your name is already circulating. The words hit like a final crack through weak walls. Chica watched Connell absorb it, and she understood something important. Men like him often think consequences begin when women cry or leave. But sometimes the world they worship hurts them in the language they respect most, access denied. He sank into the nearest chair as if his knees had forgotten their work. Nobody rushed to comfort him. Nobody should have. For years, women had carried the emotional cost of his ambition. Let him carry the weight of his collapse himself. Still, this did not end with triumph. Not for Chica. Not for Vanessa. Not for Tonia. Exposure is not healing. It only stops the bleeding from staying hidden. After that, the real work begins. And Chica knew there was one final thing left. Not another secret from Connell. A decision from her. Because what would come after this would not be about what he did anymore. It would be about what she chose. And when she lifted her head and looked across the wrecked hall, she knew with sudden certainty that the end would not find her begging to be remembered. It would find her refusing to disappear. Connell sat in the chair like a man who had just watched a building collapse and only then remembered he had been living inside it. The hall no longer looked like a wedding venue. It looked like the remains of a performance after truth had torn through the curtains. Flowers still stood in polished arrangements. The white aisle still ran neatly through the center. The cake still waited untouched. But all the meaning had left those things. What remained was evidence of how beautifully people could decorate a lie. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Chica looked around that room and realized she did not want to leave it carrying the same version of herself who had entered. She had walked in trembling, wounded, still hoping that if Connell looked at her properly, if he admitted her name, if he confessed before witnesses, maybe some small part of the dignity he stole would be returned to her. But dignity does not come back because the person who buried it suddenly gets exposed. It comes back when you stop asking the wrong person for permission to stand again. That truth settled inside her with quiet force. She took one slow step forward, then another, until she stood directly in front of Connell. He looked up at her. His face was tired now, stripped of charm, stripped of anger, stripped even of that restless arrogance that had carried him through the day. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. But Chica no longer mistook smallness for humility. He opened his mouth. "Chica, she raised her hand slightly. He stopped. "No," she said. "Today you have spoken enough." The room held still. She had never addressed him like that before. Not in private, not in public. She had always chosen softness, even in pain. She had believed softness was what kept homes from breaking. But some homes are already broken. Softness just hides the sound. Chica drew in a breath and let her voice settle. "I spent too long asking what I did wrong. I thought maybe I was too ordinary for the life you wanted. Too simple. Too patient. Too poor. Too trusting. I kept searching inside myself for the thing that made you leave." She paused, and when she continued, her voice sharpened. "But the truth is not in me. The truth is in you." Connell lowered his eyes. "You were loved when you had nothing," she said. "And instead of respecting that love, you became ashamed of the witness who saw your beginning. You did not leave me because I lacked value. You left because I remembered the version of you that had no costume." That hit him harder than shouting could have. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, as if the sentence had landed on a truth she also understood. Tonia stood silent, one hand resting lightly over her stomach, watching with the steady focus of someone who knew this moment mattered. Chica kept going. "You thought money would make you bigger. You thought new rooms, rich people, polished English, borrowed wealth, and expensive suits would bury the old you. But all you did was decorate your hunger." Her gaze did not move from his face. "And hunger without conscience will eat anything. Even the people who once fed it." The silence that followed was deep and absolute. Connell tried again, his voice weak now. "I did care about you." Chica almost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Maybe once. But care that can be traded for status is not care I will mourn anymore." There was the final cut. Not revenge. Release. Vanessa's father watched quietly, saying nothing. He did not need to. The room understood this was no longer about scandal. It was about a woman reclaiming language from the person who had used language to shrink her. Connell's mother began to cry again. This time Chica turned toward her too. "Mama," she said. The older woman looked up through tears. "I respected you. I served you. I trusted your words when you told me to be patient. If you had come to me once, just once, and said, 'My daughter, protect yourself,' I would have known you still saw me as human." Her voice softened, but only slightly. "Instead, you watched and waited for timing." The older woman broke down fully. "Forgive me," she whispered. Chica held her gaze for a moment. "I may forgive you one day. But I will never again confuse silence with love." That sentence seemed to settle over more than one person in the hall. Tonia nodded slowly, like a woman storing the words for later. Vanessa stepped forward then, no longer dressed like a bride but standing with a steadiness that made her look stronger than when the day began. She looked at Chica and said, "Thank you." Chica frowned slightly. "For what?" "For coming," Vanessa said. "For refusing to disappear. If you had not walked in, he might have gone on building over all of us." Tonia added quietly, "And if I had not come, I would still be in Port Harcourt defending a lie." Their eyes met. Something real passed between the three women then. Not an instant friendship tied together by pain. Something more solid than that. Recognition. The understanding that the same lie had touched each of them differently, but none of them had deserved it. Vanessa turned to Tonia. "Are you all right?" Tonia gave a small, tired laugh. "No. But I will be." Then she looked at Chica. "And you?" Chica thought about the question honestly. She did not want to perform strength. "Not today." "No," she said. "But I will be too." The three women stood there for one brief moment as if the room itself had changed shape around them. Connell, who had worked so hard to separate, rank, and manage them, now watched them from the chair and saw the one thing he never planned for. Solidarity. Not because they were the same. Not because they shared the same background. But because truth had finally been allowed to breathe in the same room. Connell looked at Vanessa's father as if searching for one last road back into negotiation. "Sir, please. Let us not drag this further. I have made mistakes. Big mistakes. But everything can still be handled with sense." The old man studied him, and when he spoke, his tone was colder than before. "You still think this is a matter of arrangement?" He shook his head once. "That is why you are more dangerous than you realize." Mr. Bassey quietly closed his folder. Tonia's uncle stepped nearer to his niece. The guests who remained had grown unusually quiet now, less like spectators and more like witnesses who understood they had seen something ugly enough to leave a mark. Then Chica made her decision. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded document. Connell looked up, confused. It was not something dramatic. Not a hidden revenge. Not a secret account or old letter. Just a plain file she had carried with her because some part of her, even through the pain, had still prepared for the truth that this day might end not with reconciliation but with finality. She unfolded it and held it up. "I came here with this," she said. "I didn't know if I would use it." Connell stared at the paper. "What is that?" Her eyes stayed on his. "The petition I began after you disappeared. The one I was too ashamed to finish because I kept hoping you would come back and explain yourself like a decent man." His expression changed. He knew. Chica continued, "I was going to delay again. I was going to pray again. I was going to give you one more chance to do what was right." She looked down at the paper once, then back at him. "Not anymore." And in front of everyone, she tore the old incomplete copy cleanly in two. The room reacted softly, confused at first. Then she let the torn pieces fall into a nearby decorative bowl and turned to Vanessa's father. "Sir," she said, "I will file properly. Not from shame. Not in hiding. Properly." Now the meaning was clear. She was not tearing up the case. She was tearing up the version of herself that still approached justice apologetically. Vanessa's father nodded once. "Good." Connell rose halfway from the chair. "Chica, don't do this." She looked at him with complete calm. "You already did this." He froze. Tonia spoke next, voice firm. "And I will not keep protecting your name because there is a child involved. My child will not grow up under a story built by your convenience." Vanessa followed. "And any claim that you had legitimate standing near my family through me will be answered clearly, formally, and completely. One by one, the exits closed. Not by shouting. Not by drama. By women deciding that truth would no longer be negotiated down for comfort." Connell sat back again, and this time he did look afraid. Not of noise. Of consequence. The kind that continues after the room empties. Chica looked around the hall one last time. At the flowers. At the aisle. At the guests. At the stage where another version of her pain had almost been crowned with applause. Then she realized something she had not expected. She was not leaving that hall as the woman who had been dumped for a rich wife. She was leaving as the woman who saw through the whole structure before it could fully bury her. That was different. That mattered. As people slowly began to move, Vanessa's bridesmaids gathered around her, no longer in celebration but in quiet support. Tonia's uncle placed a protective hand near her shoulder and guided her gently aside. Vanessa's father gave instructions to security and to one of his aides. Mr. Bassey, eager to save himself, stood ready to cooperate with whatever questions would come next. Connell's mother remained seated, weeping into her wrapper. Connell himself said nothing, Maybe because there was nothing left that language could save. Chica adjusted the strap of her handbag and turned toward the exit. Her steps were not rushed. They were steady. Halfway down the aisle, she stopped and looked back only once. Connell was still there, surrounded now not by admiration, but by the wreckage of his own choices. And suddenly Chica understood the deepest truth of all. He had not really married a rich woman and dumped his wife. He had tried to trade truth for status, loyalty for access, and humanity for image. And in the end, it was not wealth that shocked him. It was the fact that the women he thought he could silence had become the witnesses who finally named him correctly. Chica faced forward and kept walking. Outside, evening light was beginning to soften the city. Cars moved. People talked. Somewhere beyond the gate, ordinary life continued, as it always does, even after private worlds collapse. She stepped into that light not fully healed, not untouched, not magically free of pain, but free of illusion. And that was where her new life would begin. If this ending moved you, subscribe now, like this video, and share it with someone who needs this story. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, who you stood with most in this story, and what you would have done in their place. And if you want more stories like this, comment next or part 2. Thanks for watching.